Finding hidden gems isn't actually that easy on the Nintendo Switch, especially with the state of the eShop, but Megaton Musashi Wired definitely falls into that category, so I felt that it deserved a full SwitchUp review treatment. Let me know in the comments what you think of this one. I think there's a lot in here that may well intrigue you like it did me. What's Megaton Musashi Wired all about? Well, my name's Mark Walker, welcome back to SwitchUp. Now let's find out. The story goes that Earth has had its core basically ripped out by an alien force called the Dractor. Aliens attacking the Earth isn't exactly revolutionary, but what's quite cool is that the inhabitants have essentially had their brains wiped so that they don't know the devastation that's taken place. And a bit like the Matrix, they just kind of go about their everyday lives under this facade of normalcy. All the while there's an underground freedom fighting group using giant robots called rogues who are fighting back against the alien hordes. Even more interestingly, I believe it's actually these guys who wiped the memory of most of the people around so they don't know what's happened, because they restore the memory of the main protagonist here, restoring his memories of the grief he suffered at the hands of these aliens, and then you're essentially fighting for revenge as him. As far as the way the story plays out, it's a little Persona-esque, and I mean that in a positive way. You've got three main locations split between the town areas, Oblivion Bay Base, which is where you'll go and is hidden in one of the shops, at least the elevator to it is, to launch your missions against the aliens, and also a high school. Of course, it's always a high school, isn't it? There are several different locations in all of these areas. Some will contain side missions, other characters, but also shops and even an arcade with a playable mech game in it. But you'll also encounter some of those aliens that have infiltrated this town, taking on the guise of various humans, with what amounts to essentially mind control. There are little secrets dotted about the place, and the time of day also plays into this. While Yamato is the main protagonist, and he has his own house that you can visit, you will take control of other characters throughout the story. Yamato himself can be described as a bit of a hothead. He basically likes a brawl, but he has some great companions. I think I really liked the friend because he reminded me of Tetsuo Shima from the film Akira, well, at least in looks, and certainly the voice actor goes down the Tetsuo path from time to time. On that note, you cannot choose an English dub, which I think is a real shame. There are certain moments where it would actually benefit the gameplay, as we'll see. Still, the Japanese voice actors do a good job. There are a few moments where there are some awkward phrases that don't seem to have translated across quite as well as they could have. And in a world of AI translation, it does make you wonder if certain parts were brought across in that way. Oblivion Bay is where most of the action takes place. From here you go out on various different missions, those offline as well as online if you choose. And if you do go the online route, you can actually be joined in cross-platform play by, well, anyone that has it on any console, and it's always nice to see LAN play options. Story missions gave me XCOM vibes in the way they're dotted around the planet, and there's a brief introduction here, sometimes a cutscene, before the real meat of the game gets going with your mech customization. Now, Musashi is essentially the first mech that you'll get in the game, and Megaton is like a class of mech, so it's a basically very powerful one. But body parts are measured on several different attributes, things like weight, their rarity, and in regards to weapons, the amount of damage they'll do. As you can see, it's quite detailed in this regard, and highlighting different weapons and body parts will show you the total power increase of your mech. I love the way you see the part get slotted on, and you can save custom builds as well, a bit like Monster Hunter, because some of them will have elemental proficiencies that can be really useful in certain fights. You also might want to focus on a more fast-moving mech, and I'm going to call them mechs because robots just doesn't feel right, or one that's much heavier and more powerful. Other things to consider are ranged combat versus melee, as well as the different crew members, of which you'll gain more as the game goes on. Of course, there is visual customization. In the early parts of the game, you won't have access to much of this, and your mech will look a little bit like a hodgepodge of various different pieces taken off the shelf. A minor gripe on the controls front would be that they should have let you tab through the body parts rather than having to back out and go into the next piece. It's an area that you do quite a lot, and I noted it quite early. Now, aside from modification, you've also got the lab. You can use different components acquired for development, research, and modification, but you can also break down parts that you don't want for components. This area almost acts like a skill tree. As you can see, you branch out into different areas, unlocking new special moves which can then be applied to your mech. It's a really clever idea actually, and works very well. And it goes deeper than this as well. You actually get motherboards, and you can slot your special skills into those. You can see it actually marks out the A, B, X and Y buttons, and those are where your skills are, and then you can slot in other components such as a different CPU to boost another area of your mech. As a bit of a nerd who's built many PCs, I do quite like the way they've handled this. It just makes a lot of sense to me. So then you've decked out your mech, you're very happy with the way it's looking, it's about as well as it's going to perform, and you head into a mission. There's a cool sequence that could have been stripped straight from an anime where you see your mech descending into combat. Battle is basically a hack and slash with more depth. You've got a fast dodge move. You can speed around with your boosters, lock in onto enemies, clicking the right stick in, and there are various different combinations of moves you can perform. While pulling a trigger will actually fire your ranged weapon. As you can see down in the corner here, there are several skills that you'll gain. These are those ones I mentioned that you've modded into your motherboard, and with a combination of buttons, you can then use these, and man are they satisfying. Some of them will have you manually targeting the mech from an interior cockpit view, others set you off like a spinning top, and the combat is just very fun. Now with that said, yes, like anything that involves hacking and slashing, there are times where it may get a little repetitive, but what Megaton Musashi Wired does is constantly reward you with new upgrades, and it makes you feel powerful. To facilitate that, you've got what's known as the Kagugo system. These are essentially short-time buffs that you can apply, either improving your defense, attack, or your ability to survive. And of course, if your health drops too low, you can replenish that by pressing up on the D-pad. The general layout of maps is a little repetitive. You move into an area, the Draktor will drop in, you fight them all off, maybe pick up a few power-ups, and a gated segment will open up and you move on to the next, eventually culminating in a giant boss fight. There are other types of missions that you can optionally go on, like treasure missions, and they'll require what's known as encounter beacons. The thing is though, repetitive or not, it is damn fun. There's also nuance to the combat in that you can block, performing aerial and other types of damage can increase your chance of unlocking, and this is called Megaton Fury, which looks very cool, and it rewards precise, aggressive attacks.
Megaton Fury!
Now for some, the sheer amount of mechanics and systems at play could feel a little bit overwhelming. What I will say though, is the game never really forces you to use some of its more advanced systems. Instead, it will only reward you if you do so, but not necessarily punish you if you don't. A bit like Monster Hunter in that regard, where using certain armor builds against specific monsters will make you more effective, but not using them doesn't completely hinder you. Throw in the fact that it has that online functionality, as well as special online only items to be unlocked. There is a lot to love here. Something that really does irk me though, and I just wanted to use the word irk, but you'll get what I'm talking about, is that it has what's almost a battle pass system that you'd see in a mobile game. It means that every time you log on, it will give you a daily reward or show you your progression across this battle pass. I don't understand why that's in here at all. Personally, I completely ignore it and just carry on with the game. It's not too intrusive for the rest of the time, but I really wish they'd have scrapped that completely. If you are a fan of mechs and you want to get into a new game, I can highly recommend this though. The story and gameplay are excellent. They score 18 out of 20. The controls are great. You can instantly lock onto enemies, you can change the XY, sprint around, fast travel absolutely anywhere. They only lose a point for when performance drops a tiny bit. Controls score 19 out of 20. Interestingly, the game runs at 60 frames per second in the open areas where you're running around. I mean, it makes sense because it's not really full 3D. It's much easier for the CPU to manage it, and it's essentially wireframe animations. Still, I am glad they made this choice, and when you're in combat in the full 3D environments, it does drop down to 30 FPS. It looks okay, there are some slightly muddy textures, but the mechs themselves, particularly on the equipment screen in full 3D, do look great. And there's a lot of detail there, even down to allowing you to change the surface texture of the metal, as well as its shininess. The environments can get a little repetitive, although buildings can be crushed and destroyed. You'll soon see the same ones repeated time and time again, but it nails its sense of scale and speed. Megaton Musashi Wired has a fantastic soundtrack. I only wish they had an English dub for this version. I know Purists like to say that the Japanese version is always the only way to have your speech, but I am not a purist, and I would like to have it in English, especially when I'm fighting in combat and the players are shouting things out, and the last thing I want to do is read on-screen text. In handheld, everything looks glorious. It really is my preferred way to play at the moment with a lot of these releases, especially when stretched over a 4K TV, they just don't hold up as well. I haven't had any crashes, and bar some repetition, it's a nice enough looking game. Visuals and performance, that scores 17 out of 20. Sound and audio, that also scores 17 out of 20. If you're picking this game up before July the 11th, then that's going to drastically change the value score as it's currently 50% off. The retail of £39.99 seems reasonable. You've got over 20 chapters here, you have the online and local play modes, and the whole thing squeezes into 18.2 gigs. Now there are a variety of different versions, but the standard version is going to be more than enough for most people. If you are a mecha fan, then you are definitely going to enjoy this one a great deal and get a lot out of it. Even at full price, value scores 17 out of 20. And obviously if you're lucky enough like me to have picked it up on sale at 50% off, well, that can only be higher. Megaton Musashi Wired is definitely one of Level 5's most enjoyable games, and it's so unusual that, for me at least, I didn't see any marketing for it at all. It's a glorious mashup of Persona-like RPG storytelling, mech customization, and the usual array of bizarre shenanigans that come with these games. It gets a SwitchUp score of 88%. Thank you to our Patreons and members, all of you that seem to enjoy the videos, and as always, for all things Switch all the time, keep it SwitchUp. Cheers guys, see ya!